to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6 today. Coming up on today's show, 60 years ago, the UK was the world leader in nuclear power. Did Boris Johnson today press the restart switch on the energy policy Britain forgot it was good at? Also, she's broken no tax law, so why does it? Does it matter that the Chancellor's wife is non-dom for financial purposes? We'll discuss. And the virus that I'm afraid does keep on giving. Now we learn that COVID causes deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolisms. A doctor will explain. Alongside me throughout today's show, founder of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. But first, we've got the headlines for you with Simon.
Thanks, Colin. It's 4:01. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The United Nations General Assembly is preparing to vote on a move to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. These are live pictures from New York, where countries are outlining their views before the vote gets underway. Ukraine has accused Russia of war crimes and says troops have killed dozens of civilians in the town of Bucha. A two-thirds majority vote by the Assembly can suspend a state for systematic violations of human rights. We'll bring you the result of that vote when it happens. Meanwhile, NATO members have agreed to strengthen support for Ukraine following a meeting with foreign ministers. Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Secretary-General, says they're ready to provide a wide range of weapon systems to the country. Ukraine's foreign minister says although sanctions are enough to inflict damage on the Russian economy, they're not enough to stop the war. The UK is banning all imports of Russian energy and stepping up its supply of weapons to Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss revealed the new measures at a NATO gathering of foreign ministers in Brussels. Ukraine's foreign minister says the country needs more weapons from its allies to repel Russian forces. In other news, the Prime Minister has defended the government's energy strategy after Labour criticised the plan as too little, too late. The government says it wants to reduce the UK's dependence on overseas oil and gas by creating more nuclear, wind, solar and hydrogen power facilities. Under the plan, up to 8 nuclear reactors will be delivered by 2030. Visiting Hinkley Point C, Boris Johnson said the strategy is about making sure the UK is never blackmailed by people like Vladimir Putin again.
This is about tackling some of the mistakes of the past and making sure that we are set well for the future. We're no longer subject to, we're never again subject to the vagaries of the global oil or gas price. We can't be subject to blackmail, as it were, from people such as Vladimir Putin. We have energy security here in the UK.
Boris Johnson there. Meanwhile, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said the measures fail to address the issues people face now.
This won't help those who only last week saw their energy bills go up by hundreds of pounds. What they want from the government is a response that meets that challenge. This list, this cobbled together list of things that could and should have been done over the last 10 to 12 years isn't enough. And, you know, it leaves, because of political squabbling, it leaves out of account really important initiatives like keeping homes warm, insulating homes, which I've seen for myself, can make a huge difference and reduce bills by up to £400. That's the sort of real action we were looking for today.
The Prime Minister has welcomed the President of Poland to Downing Street. Boris Johnson says the UK and Poland are working together to alleviate the suffering in Ukraine, adding that the crisis has brought the two countries closer. President Duda says the two leaders will discuss what can be done on the international stage so that sanctions are stepped up to contain Russian aggression. Both hailed the historic alliance between the two countries. A security guard accused of spying for Russia at the British Embassy in Berlin has pleaded not guilty. David Smith appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court, charged with 9 offences under the Official Secrets Act. He's been remanded in custody. The British national was extradited to the UK from Germany. A search and rescue mission has resumed to look for a British man and his teenage son who went missing on a diving trip in Malaysia yesterday. 46-year-old Adrian Chesters and his 14-year-old Dutch son Nathan were reported missing with two others while diving near the coastal town of Mersing. A 35-year-old Norwegian woman has been rescued and taken to hospital. She told authorities she lost sight of the other divers after the group drifted far from their boat due to strong underwater currents. A French national is still unaccounted for. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now, though. It's back to Brazier.
4:05, a little bit earlier than usual. We'll start with our big story today. The Prime Minister has put nuclear at the heart of his new energy strategy, which sets out a plan for Britain to draw about a quarter of our power now from reactors. As many as at least four new nuclear power stations, as well as scores of smaller modular reactors will have to be built to quadruple the country's nuclear energy capacity. Nuclear is clean and reliable, but it's not cheap and it can't be delivered quickly. The ban on fracking, meanwhile, which could deliver cheap power quickly, will remain, at least for now. And the massive expansion in wind and solar, both of which can be expensive, will persist. So is the energy plan a welcome shift away from the wishful thinking of net zero, or a slow and expensive response to the energy crisis we find ourselves in right now? Joining me is Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK, who's flanked by Peter Whittle, who's going to be here for the whole length of the show. Gentlemen, thanks both for being here. Richard, to you first. Did I sense a slight grimace when I used the word modular, which has become a fashionable word, hasn't it? Look, nobody quite understands.
Look, the reality is that this is a disastrous energy strategy announced today. In fact, it's not a strategy, it's lunacy. All it's going to do is increase fivefold the amount of offshore wind farms, wind turbines, renewables, and there is a direct link why electricity prices have tripled in the last 15 years, from 2005 to 2020, and the increase in renewables. Absolute direct link because of the subsidies, the balancing costs, the transmission costs. And rather than learn the lesson, the government have not doubled down, they've trebled down on this mistake. So that is disastrous. The expansion or sort of reverting to nuclear that we were very good at, yes, it's welcome. We've been calling that for a long time, but it's a decade plus away.
Better now than never.
Better now than never, fine. A little bit of credit where credit's due. But what they haven't done is the obvious thing, which is, remember, there are 25 million domestic gas boilers in this country. And electricity never has and never will power a gas boiler, right? It's just a matter of engineering fact. And they've done nothing for gas, whereas actually we have this treasure under our feet that you and I have talked about before. All they've done is said, we'll review the evidence about seismicity. It's a nice new word for us all to remember. That's the nice way of talking about earthquakes, tremors, moving your chair across a floor. That's 0.5 of a tremor. That's what we should be doing. We should be going hard now for this treasure under our feet that's worth about the value of our national debt. I mean, this is serious money, Colin.
Who's pushing for that in government, Richard? Because
No one is pushing for that in government.
The idea of Quadrilla in Lancashire having to pour cement down the wells, that's gone, right?
That went at the last minute, and that was, I think, thanks to the pressure that some of us from the outside have been putting on, and some Tory MPs like Steve Baker and Craig McKinley and co from the inside. But remember, they're not in government. Within Bayes, Kwasi Kwarteng, his team, within Number 10, massive resistance to this huge opportunity that's right there under our feet. And I remind everybody, particularly those who say it wouldn't make any difference because we're subject to world prices, the United States has gas prices a fraction of ours. And what do they use, Colin? They use their own domestic shale gas. And the moment they started it, in the late 2000s, their gas prices collapsed. And that's our opportunity. So my prediction, if we go down this route of more renewables, more wind farms, electricity prices in the next 5 to 10 years will double or treble again from these levels. Imagine that. That's where this is going. That's why I think it's lunacy.
And just to come back, Peter, feel free to chip in. You've been very good, actually.
I was actually going to agree there with what Richard was saying about America and how it's sort of transformed the energy landscape there. I'd like to know, Richard, as someone who's been obviously thinking about this a lot. Who are they frightened of here, exactly? Who are the government frightened of?
They're frightened of the eco-zealots, the green lobby. There's a massive part of the Conservative Party now. I think they call it the Conservative Environment Network, has got over 100 Tory MPs signed up to. Let's remember, these are the same Tory MPs who don't pay their energy bills because they're paid as part of their expenses. So it's all very nice for them to try and be green and fluffy. But actually, for those of us that do pay our energy bills, people are really feeling it. And there's no relief, no help whatsoever. And you just think they're so out of touch.
Haven't we been reminded, though, of how adversity is the mother of invention? Along comes a real crisis. Along comes Ukraine. And suddenly, having dithered and prevaricated for 2 decades at least, we get a long-term energy strategy revolving around nuclear declared within 3 weeks. I mean, OK, that's daft. But it does remind you, doesn't it, when push comes to shove, government can act quickly.
Yes, but a decade plus to get the first of those new reactors in place is not quick, Colin. So yes, better late than never. But the quick thing, if you start using the Quadrilla wells, the Ineos wells that are already there, and many, many more, you could have a significant change in between 2 to 5 years. Significant change, reducing gas prices that we all use in our homes and our gas boilers.
Peter?
I think what's interesting about these situations that we have at the moment with Russia, they're very clarifying, aren't they? Now, most people, average Joe public, now knows about the amount of energy coming to Germany, for example, and where it came from. I don't think they really knew that before. It makes you sort of understand politics and geopolitics much more easily.
It's not some abstract concept when it affects your fuel bill.
Well, exactly, but also it's a real threat, isn't it, to the whole idea of globalisation. It shows the real limits to that.
Richard, just before we let you go, how quickly can fracking come on stream? Because you hear those people, and I know you don't like to use the fracking, shale gas. How quickly can shale gas come on stream? If we started at it right now, how long?
If we started right now, it could start to make a real difference within 3 years and a significant difference within 5 years. But it requires determination, commitment and motivation. They've demonstrated it for nuclear. Now, come on, guys, let's go for the shale gas. Let's make that difference quickly.
Richard Tice, thanks very much indeed. Let's move on. Drivers have been brought to a standstill along 2 major routes in Kent due to delays in channel crossings. Dozens of flights have been cancelled because of staff sickness. And EasyJet and other airlines too. If you are planning an Easter holiday, will you get away without a hitch or a hiccup? Let's turn to the CEO of the PC agency, Paul Charles, who explained some of the problems that the travelling public were facing yesterday. Paul, welcome to you again. What's the story today?
Well, it's not getting that much better, I'm afraid. We're still seeing large numbers of delays and cancellations from the main carriers out of the UK, EasyJet and British Airways. British Airways already cancelling some 50 to 60 flights tomorrow, and EasyJet a similar number. So it's not getting that much better. And as I said yesterday, I think we are going to be in for a fairly turbulent couple of months, with flights being cancelled at short notice during the very peak Easter period.
So a couple of months' trouble. Pinch point Sunday?
Well, the pinch point will probably be the middle of next week. That's when you start to see most people going away, especially families, around about the 13th, 14th of April. That's when you start to see things pick up just before the Easter weekend, and then, of course, coming back around 7 days later. So the period between the 13th and the 20th of April is going to be a long pinch point. And talking to the airports, many of the airports this morning, they're already looking at how they can bring in more staff who don't need security clearance. So those will be staff who could work on the sort of land side, if you like, of the airport. That is the before you go through security, where you don't need security passes. That's where they're looking at using more staff and moving staff who might have security passes, who would normally only work on the land side, moving to what's called airside, where the planes are. So you're going to see some shifting of people around airports to help to reduce the queues, especially at Manchester and Heathrow.
Paul, I think you were saying earlier this week that actually the problem is bigger than that, because there are serious systemic problems for this industry now, because unsurprisingly, 2 years ago when COVID really bit, some people, whether they were cabin crew or people working at the airports, thought, crikey, it's time to retrain, it's time to do something else. If they didn't do it right at the beginning, maybe they did it a year in. Either way, there are thousands of people who used to work in aviation who no longer do, who've chosen to go down a different path. And retraining them, replacing them, as you say, it may be a matter of 2 months. It may be many more months still, in fact.
You're absolutely right. We're seeing a fundamental change in how the industry operates. Essentially, during the pandemic, because of lots of people being put on furlough, tens and tens of thousands of people being put on furlough or being made redundant in the case of cabin crews and pilots, they opted to leave the industry and to retrain. And we heard many stories of pilots, for example, earning £100,000, £120,000 a year, choosing or being forced to leave the industry and going for jobs paying them £30,000 to £40,000 working with supermarkets. So fundamentally, you saw a redrawing of who was working in the industry, and the industry has not been able to replace all of those people fast enough for the snapback in demand. So this is why we're in the situation we're in, where airlines and airports especially are finding they simply don't have the staff numbers to cope with the demand. Yet they sold the tickets. The airlines knew what the demand was going to be, but weren't able to staff for it.
Paul Charles, as ever, appreciate your time. Thanks very much. Peter Whittle is alongside me. I just wonder, there is clearly, the floodgates have opened.
Yeah.
COVID restrictions have been dropped. The ASA, you don't need a mask on plane anymore. People are determined to fly, see family they haven't seen for years, that sort of thing. I did wonder in the depths of COVID whether, as people were having more and more staycations, holidays in the UK, whether that marked a permanent change.
I've got a feeling it probably has, actually. I mean, I don't know about you, Colin, but I mean, I love going to different places. I love travelling. I hate now the act of travelling, the actual thing. You know, we've been seeing there all the massive queues. You know, I think basically I'd say since 9/11, it's been going downhill as an experience. But when you look at all of these airlines, I used to think all of these airlines must be bankrupt, surely. They must actually be technically bankrupt. So I think what we've seen is an industry reach its peak during our lifetime, and it's now going down the other side.
I'm amazed any of them survived, actually, given what the last 2 years. It's amazing, really. Peter Flannery, thanks very much indeed. Well, slightly related to that story, many thought the end to commuting en masse will be good for the environment. This was, you know, the heights of COVID, people working from home, but perhaps not, working from home part-time at least. Turns out it seems to be bad for the environment. This is according to some new research. Hybrid workers, people who end up doing a bit from home, bit in the office, if that's where they're going, end up travelling further each week than office-based workers, despite taking fewer trips. This is the conclusion of the University of Sussex's Business School. Those going into the office once or twice a week travelled an average of 100 miles each week, compared to 63.5 miles for those almost always going in. Who'd have thunk it? Well, joining me now, Amanda Lennon, an employment lawyer and HR director at Spencer West. Are you surprised, Amanda?
I am surprised, actually, because I think pre-pandemic, we were much more used to working in an office on a full-time basis. And the pandemic has generated working from home. Now that we are in this post-COVID world, the struggle is now for employers to get employees back into the office. So I am surprised by the results of that research.
I just, from an HR perspective, obviously not necessarily talking about people you deal with, but you'll talk to other people in HR. Is it the experience of people in HR that they are finding employees now who feel, because of COVID, actually not so much because of COVID, because of the changing nature of the labour market, there does seem to be a labour crunch, more so in certain sectors than others. And actually the employee, when it comes to negotiating with an employer, increasingly holds, if not the whip hand, then a bit more power than they once had. And if they say, look, you want to keep hold of my talents, it's going to be 2 days in the office, 3 days in the Lake District.
Absolutely. And I am working with employers who are seeing this more and more, where employees now have the opportunity to work home from more. They're making lifestyle choices. And in some cases, that means moving further away from where they were based pre-pandemic. And that means that if they do have to come into an office, that's a much bigger journey for them. So it is an issue for employers in that sense. The other issue that you have is with workers who don't want to now come back to the office, because the benefit for employees of what's happened during the lockdown is that there is, I think, an element of flexibility which is now inbuilt. Previously, you had to apply for flexible working, which included working from home. In some cases, it was a very formal process following a policy. And now I think it's inherent in many office workers, at least, jobs.
I just wonder, Amanda, so many, I'm not going to call them woke, but so many big companies now have corporate policies around things like environmentalism, and they want to be good, fluffy employers and treat their staff well as well. Now, here seem two irreconcilable objectives. Be nice to your staff, they want to work from home, but turns out working from home is bad for the environment. How do you square that?
I think it's a very fine balance. In recent years, we've seen very much a rise in employers focusing on sustainability and environmental impacts of their business, carbon footprint, etc. And yet, on the other hand, as you said before, there's a real war on talent at the moment, in particular sectors such as technology especially, which means that the employees do have a stronger hand in the negotiations than they might have done pre-pandemic. So I think the balance is one of reasonableness. It depends on the particular role. Employers want people to come into the office because they do value the relationship building and getting things done that having meetings face to face brings. But at the same time, I think most employees have been able to prove during the pandemic from working from home that they can do just as good a job working from home as they can in an office. So what I'm seeing employers doing to try and counteract this is have a hybrid working policy. It doesn't suit everybody, but I think that's the balance that they're treading at the moment.
Amanda Lennon, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Peter Whittle is alongside me.
Yeah, this is a bit of a bugbear of mine, actually, Colin, because I think there's a huge kind of, well, dare I say, class divide here, because the people who can make these choices, the point was made right at the beginning of the pandemic, if you remember. Largely middle class, a lot of them professional, but in office jobs, can stay at home. What about the army of people who simply cannot stay at home? That's what I worry about, because when we're in London at the moment. You walk through London. I'm sure it's the same in other cities. Whole ecosystems have basically disappeared. The little cafe, the dry cleaners, this, that, the other. They've all gone because people aren't coming in to use them. And I do wonder, it's interesting what the lady was saying there, because I do also wonder about the mental health ramifications of isolation, which right now might seem very nice. But in the fullness of time, I don't think it's a good thing for society.
I'm struck by the numbers, Peter. I mean, that's a massive weekly commute that some people are doing. I mean, are you hearing the stories of people?
Oh yes. Well, I mean, I've actually moved out of London. I'm not that far, but I know a lot of people who've moved out of London. Some are sort of regretting. I'm talking about my experience in London. I don't mean to be London-centric about this, but I think that basically what people thought they might be getting, they're not getting necessarily, and so they're sort of moving back. But what is it? 700,000-800,000 people moved out of the capital in this time. That is that's a tenth. That's a tenth of the population.
Amazing.
And I think that's huge. I mean, the ramifications are huge, I think.
Yeah, where have they all gone? Peter, thanks very much indeed. After the break, one of the killers of Jamie Bolger is bidding to get out of prison. It's that old question, should life mean life for the most serious of crimes? It's the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGiven. For many of us, it feels a bit more like winter once again, with strong winds from the north, but those winds are now easing. Showers clearing for many overnight, and it will be a cold night as this low pulls away. That leaving northerly winds and a cold airflow across much of the UK. And the winds stay brisk during the rest of Thursday before eventually easing inland overnight. And actually, there'll be further showers for a time before they also ease inland overnight. But coastal parts continue to see showers come and go. And with those showers falling as rain, sleet, hail and snow for northern Scotland, some icy patches around first thing. Certainly a widespread frost tomorrow morning. Clear spells, but temperatures around 0 or a touch below in some sheltered spots. Frost-free, meanwhile, for the far south of England. Here, cloudier skies greet us and a few light outbreaks of rain just skirting the south coast throughout much of Friday. Eventually, brighter skies follow, but for much of the UK, it's a case of sunny spells and showers during Friday. A brisk wind continues, but not as strong as today, and that wind continuing to bring showers in from the north. Now, 12 Celsius in the south, 10, 11 Celsius for northern England, I think 8 or 9 for much of Scotland, so it will feel cold in the wind. And there'll be further showers of a wintry nature coming into parts of Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Rain and hail at lower levels, snow above around 150 metres. So a frosty start to the weekend, but a bright start once again. And with lighter winds and a bit more sunshine around, Saturday looks like a more cheerful day compared to Thursday and Friday. In fact, showers will be mostly confined to northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, North Wales. Otherwise, plenty of fine and bright weather. And Sunday starts once again with a widespread frost. But for the vast majority, it'll be a dry and bright day.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Now, one of the infamous, it's reasonable to use that word in this instance, infamous killers of James Bulger, John Venables, is bidding to be let out of prison on parole before a new law is brought in, which is designed to ensure those guilty of the most heinous crimes do not get their freedom back early. Venables, who killed the 2-year-old James Bulger in Merseyside in 1993, was reported to be pushing for parole in February and could have a full hearing as early as September. James Bulger's father wants to speak at the parole hearing and explain why Venables, the release of Venables, if that's what it is, ought to be blocked. It's a question we've put before. It's a question that animates people still. Should a life sentence mean life in reality? Joining me now, a former prison inmate, Adz Khan. Adz, welcome to you. Just on that bald question, should life mean life? How do you answer that question?
I mean, look, firstly, my thoughts go back to the Bulger family. And secondly, life should be in life in very serious of crimes. In case of John Venables, I mean, releasing him, not only is it ethically wrong, not only is it morally wrong, not only is it systematically wrong, but it's downright categorically wrong and excuse upon it's criminal.
Can we just talk a little bit about people who are inside on life sentences? I mean, you've been on the inside. You know how prison cultures work. It's this subculture which, thankfully, the vast majority of people have no knowledge of. How are people on proper life sentences, full life term sentences, tariffs? How are they seen on the inside? How differently do they behave because they know they will never be let out of prison?
But it depends. I mean, some people are just straight up killers. You know, no matter, no rehabilitation is going to be going to get them right. So, likes of Ian Huntley or Myra Hindley or Harold Shipman, these people thrive off that. So, in my opinion, no rehabilitation is going to keep them on the right track. You can rehabilitate prisoners, but you can't rehabilitate child predators. And the behaviour of them inside is one. Some are really remorseful of the crimes, and others aren't. And the ones that aren't, obviously, in my opinion, need to stay inside prison for a lot longer.
As when you list that sort of litany of rogues gallery, Myra Hindley, Ian Huntley, they were all massive news stories at the time. And because they become massive news stories, the politicians get involved, don't they? We were doing a story last week about Baby P and Baby P's mum and the parole hearing, and then Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, got involved. What I'm trying to say is that there are some stories that are so big, there are some murders that appall the country, that politicians then feel they have to get involved.
Yeah, they do. And I think it's any crime, any murder, if you've gone there with intent to kill somebody, it needs punishment. It shouldn't be just because, you know, one's high profile and the other one isn't. That's something that every murder, every crime, there has to be punishment for that. And it's not isolating cases. I mean, the James Bulger case, it was a very devastating case, very cruel. And, you know, there was elements of torture in there. So I'm not surprised it's made the news. It's just sad for the family to relive it all over again.
Yeah. I mean, that's necessary. If we're going to talk about the story, they have to relive it to some degree, don't they? Ads Khan, very good to talk to you. Appreciate your thoughts today. Thanks very much indeed. Peter Whittle alongside me. It is a hardy perennial, this Does Life Mean Life?
Well, yes, why should it be a hardy perennial? And that's because it often doesn't. And because I think the thing is, Colin, I think one of the things is that the judiciary, you know, and our law enforcement, I think if you understand that they basically don't like punishing people very much, everything becomes much easier to understand, I think. In the case of Bulger, the killer, frankly, he should be locked up forever, in my view.
Even though he was a child?
Or almost more so that he was a child, actually. Because the thing is that we look at crime a lot of the time and start to say, oh, it must be down to social conditions and all of this stuff. But basically, I'm sorry, in this case, this was, well, I don't use the word evil much, but the wickedness was such that, frankly, you can't use those kind of reasons. I don't think anyone did try to use them.
There has to be, people talk a lot, don't they, about policing by consent. I think there have to be, the judicial system requires some consent too. And I'm afraid to say that sometimes means that some of the cases that Ads Khan was listing there, Ian Huntley, Myra Hindley. I mean, Myra Hindley made a pretty good case, actually, for saying, I'm a very different person from the person who was dragged along to commit the Moors murders. But actually no politician, no Home Secretary on his or her watch could possibly say to the public, we can let that one go now.
Yeah, no, I mean, basically, I think politicians, are not really to be listened to too much on these things because they always ride popular waves. But I think, frankly, you know, you've got to actually be serious about this and not keep looking and say, well, when is the moment we can let someone out? You know, I mean, those particular cases that you talked about, and also, Bulger, do you remember the film of the little boy being taken? It's just appalling. And these kids were like, you know, it was a demonic crime.
Yeah, it's a heck of a word to use, but I think it's probably the right one. Peter Finot, thanks very much indeed. After the break, the Chancellor's wife in the headlines for not paying tax on her earnings outside the UK. That's not strictly true. She's paying tax on Indian earnings and she's paying tax on British earnings in the UK. It's complicated. It's tax. We'll discuss it anyway. And the question that it prompts, should we judge politicians by their families? We'll have that debate here. First, latest news headlines.
Thanks, Colin. It's 4:34. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The United Nations General Assembly is preparing to vote on a move to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. These are live pictures from New York, where countries are outlining their views before the vote gets underway. Ukraine has accused Russia of war crimes and says troops have killed dozens of civilians in the town of Bucha. A two-thirds majority vote by the Assembly can suspend a state for systematic violations of human rights. We'll bring you the result of that vote when it happens. Meanwhile, NATO members have agreed to strengthen support for Ukraine. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says they're ready to provide a wide range of weapon systems to the country. Ukraine's foreign minister says although sanctions are enough to inflict damage on the Russian economy, they're not enough to stop the war. In other news, the Prime Minister has defended the government's energy strategy after Labour criticised the plan as too little too late. The government says it wants to reduce the UK's dependence on overseas oil and gas by creating more nuclear, wind, solar and hydrogen power facilities. Under the plan, up to 8 nuclear reactors will be delivered by 2030. A security guard who worked at the British Embassy in Berlin has denied spying for Russia. David Smith, who was extradited from Germany, pleaded not guilty to 9 offences under the Official Secrets Act at Westminster Magistrates Court. He's due to return to the Old Bailey next week. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Colin will be back in just a moment.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
One of the biggest stories today, certainly in the what we used to call the tabloids, was the wife of the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and her tax affairs. She's a non-dom. She's an Indian national. She pays tax on Indian earnings in India. Any UK earnings she pays in the UK. Done absolutely legally, nothing wrong, but some political mischief is being made. So what are we to make of that? We'll be discussing that shortly with Peter Whittle here and somebody who takes a different view. But in the meantime, let's reflect on this story for you. The man accused of murdering the Southend West MP, Sir David Amess, has told a court today that he has no regrets over the death, and he admitted to having previously wanted to target Michael Gove. Giving evidence from the witness stand, Ali Harbi Ali told jurors at the Old Bailey he'd decided to kill Sir David because of his voting record on airstrikes against Syria. Let's go to the Old Bailey and speak to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. And Mark, some extraordinary revelations in court today.
Yes, we are approaching the end stages, Colin, of this trial of Harbi Ali, the man accused of murdering Sir David Amess on the 15th of October last year. And in court today, in 80 minutes of testimony from the witness box, it was dramatic as he admitted to stabbing Sir David Amess to death. He was asked if he showed any remorse, any contritions for that, and he said no, that he felt he was justified because he felt his actions were actually saving the lives of Muslims, and that was because, as you mentioned in your intro there, the voting record of Sir David Amess, according to this man accused of his murder, was such that it was leading to the deaths of Muslims in countries like Syria. When cross-examined by the prosecution, he said, "I decided to do it because I felt that if I could kill someone who made decisions to kill Muslims, it could prevent further harm to those Muslims." He went on saying, he, Sir David, voted previously in Parliament, not just him. I decided if I couldn't make hijrah, in other words, travel to Syria and join the Islamic State, if I couldn't help the Muslims in Syria, I would do something here. And so he set out to carry out this plot, and according to the prosecutors, it was a plot that was 5 years in the making, where he had for a time other potential victims in his sight, scoping out the Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, even writing down, Colin, possible methods of attack, such as bumping into Michael Gove as he returned from his morning jog. He also was looking at the possibility of an attack on the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, and on the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer. In the end, he decided on Sir David Amess, an easy target, a local MP who was always available and accessible to his constituents. And of course, Sir David was at this Baptist church in Leigh-on-Sea holding that regular constituency surgery on the 15th of October last year, when Harbi Ali travelled down to Southend and carried out the attack. As I say, we're at the end stages now of this trial, with the summing up by the prosecution, defence and the judge expected on Monday of next week.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark White there. Now, as we were saying a few moments ago, should we judge politicians by their family members? It's the debate question today. I ask it because of the storm breaking over the heads of one of Britain's most gilded couples, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and his, I think it's fair to say, fabulously wealthy wife, Akshata Murthy. She has non-dom status. That means she does not have to pay UK tax on income earned abroad. We were planning on getting into what that non-dom means with a tax expert. That may yet happen, but we may do it tomorrow as a story. But today there's a more general question, and that more general question is whether, when it comes to politics, we can heap the sins of one family member onto another. Think of the scrutiny faced by previous PM's wives, Sherry Blair, the current one, Carrie Johnson. What about the role of children? Remember some of the scrutiny the Blair children used to face, for instance. Was it right to sanction even Vladimir Putin's daughters because their father is a global pariah? They don't get to choose their dad, do they? We're joined in the studio by Peter Whittle, founder and director of the New Culture Forum think tank, and the writer and broadcaster Mike Yardley, who joins us, who will be joining us soon. So, Peter, you're going to have to hold the fort until he does. Sure. I think it's a fascinating story, this, about the limits of where you can take politics in terms of hinting at a slur.
Yes.
She's done nothing illegal.
Absolutely nothing. I think that, I mean, basically, from my point of view, it seems this is pure sort of political mischief making, really, because there's no question of any facilitating on his part. There's nothing like that. It's just that basically she's very, very rich, I guess, and that is what maybe the left don't like, particularly when you've got, it's a Tory Chancellor at a very difficult time with the cost of living, etc. But really, I think that on a general point, Colin, I was thinking about this on the way here, that Randolph Churchill was Churchill's son, and he was, by all accounts, a pretty ne'er-do-well character, liked his drink, all of this. Should that reflect on Churchill? I mean, or should it at the time? Or
Randolph Churchill was Churchill's father.
And his son.
And his son was called Randolph as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
And interestingly, Randolph Churchill, the father, married an American heiress.
Yes, indeed.
As opposed to an Indian heiress.
Those days.
to clear your debts.
Country park going, But, yes, I mean, family members, you were posing the question, family members generally. I think, people should not be held to account for their families.
OK, well, we've got Mike Yardley. Let's turn to for a different perspective, maybe, from him. Hi to you, Mike. What do you make of this cloud that's hanging over the Sunaks?
Well, I think the issue really is the tax status of the Chancellor's family, indeed any politician's family, a legitimate sphere of inquiry. And I think it is. I don't think there's any suggestion here that Mrs. Sunak has done anything illegal. The question is really, has the Chancellor himself, or indeed other politicians, are they benefiting from non-dom status? And that is something I think we should talk about. Meantime, it also brings up perhaps the much more important issue, is how can these incredibly wealthy people really be in touch with a lot of ordinary people? Now, the Chancellor has presented himself as a tax-cutting Chancellor, as a sort of Thatcherite, if you like. But the truth of it is we've never paid so much tax ever, not since the 1950s, perhaps. 70% or so is what the average person pays in tax. And can the Chancellor really be in touch with a lot of ordinary people? It's not just a question, of a mum who might be living in a tower block somewhere with a couple of kids. We're talking about not just low-income people now. We're talking about middle-income people who are finding it increasingly hard to cope. Can the Chancellor and do other very, very wealthy politicians really understand their lot? It seems at the moment to me that this country is heading to disaster. Between fuel bills, farmer friends tell me that food's going up as well. We have got all sorts of problems coming down the line, and I'm not convinced the government's doing anything like enough to address those issues.
Peter Whittle, I remember when I was at my previous employer, I'd done an interview with George Osborne. He wasn't quite Chancellor, he was Shadow Chancellor at the time. He got very cross. In fact, he rang my boss and complained that I'd had the temerity to suggest that somebody who was, if not a full-blown aristocrat themselves, then who had married into the aristocracy and was worth a few bob, could really understand what it was like to be poor. Politicians get really sensitive about this, the idea they can't relate to, what it is to buy a pint of milk, etc. Peter, does it matter?
Well, I think in a way, you see, Mike has sort of proved my original point we were talking about, which is that he was saying, how can somebody like Rishi Sunak and his wife, how can they possibly understand, what people are going through? That is a legitimate argument that we could have at any time. But I think that this was quite specific. This seemed to be anger at her financial arrangements, which all seemed to be above board. I think we go down a very dark route, in a way, if you start, pouring over people's families, what their financial arrangements are. It could even be what their sexual arrangements are, or whatever they've done in the past. And that somehow this is some kind of moral judgment that should be shared by the politician involved. And I think that's not the right way to go. But I think that if you want to talk about should people who are chancellors and prime ministers, should they, for example, should there be a limit to what they should have in terms of wealth? I mean, you can argue about that if you like. I think it's a pretty spurious argument, really, but it's a different one.
Mike, just in terms of, the propriety of the thing, I mean, we're told that when he became a minister, Rishi Sunak made abundantly clear what his tax situation was. She, because you can't have both dual nationalities as an Indian, she has to, born and brought up in India. She chooses to be an Indian citizen still. Earnings from India are paid as tax in India. I think income tax there is about 30p in the pound, for instance. So there is no sense in which she is not fulfilling her tax obligations in the jurisdiction to which she belongs. You could argue there's another question here, which nobody's really touched yet, which is if Rishi Sunak, as some people feel he ought to, becomes the next Prime Minister, whether we can have a Prime Minister whose spouse is a foreign national.
And I think I'm not quite sure of the precise terming of the law, but I think she has to say that she's going back to live in India one day to benefit from this non-dom status. I tend to agree with Peter, though. I mean, I don't think we should bring in people's personal lives too much, but I do think that this issue of the enormous wealth of some politicians and how that brings them out of touch with ordinary people is something that we should be discussing. And I do say that I don't think that the government is looking forward to the future. At the moment, we are heading towards disaster. Many people can't pay their bills. More people aren't going to be able to pay their bills. That's going to lead to social and political chaos in Britain. And a Tory government, a Conservative government of all people, should be addressing this problem.
Peter Whittle, I wonder just on the point about whether politicians' private lives and their family, their relations, familial relations matter. We're talking here about financial matters, financial matters. What about moral questions? I mean, I remember doing a monologue on GB News about Matt Hancock when it was found he'd been unfaithful. And I take the view, and it's a really unfashionable view, that actually if somebody's prepared to lie to their spouse, they're more inclined perhaps to lie to the voter. Really old-fashioned view, but I think it's a legitimate question at least.
Well, I mean, Colin, I like to think I'm old-fashioned, but actually, I don't really think that is a particularly old-fashioned view. If anything, the old-fashioned view was that basically people's private lives were their own. You know, if you look at some of the great leaders we've had in Britain, Lloyd George, he was known as the GOAT, for example, because he was forever being unfaithful all over the place. And, it didn't change his political status as such, and neither should it. The difference with someone like Matt Hancock, and this is why I would agree with you, this is outright hypocrisy. If you're telling people that they should, follow a certain rule and you don't do it yourself in a very blatant way, then that is quite different. All bets are off then, I think.
Mike Yardley, final word. I mean, I think this is pretty low politics, actually, but the job's done, isn't it? Now, when people look at Rishi Sunak and his wife in the future, pictures of them, it will leave a bad taste for some people. There's absolutely no logical basis for it. I think that's quite grubby politics.
No, I think you make a point, and I don't think it is really fair on her. But Rishi Sunak has presented himself to the public as a tax-cutting chancellor, and he hasn't done that. And I think the other issue, the philosophical and political issue we need to discuss, is how much influence does big money have on politics? Look at the US, for example. You cannot become president unless you are a multi-billionaire. In our own politics, how much does money hold sway? These are important issues, and you don't have to be a socialist or a Marxist, and I'm certainly neither of those, to consider these issues and to consider what impact this vast wealth has on our politics.
Mike Yardley, Peter Whittle, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thanks both very much indeed. After the break, a study suggesting that after a COVID infection, there is an increased risk of developing a blood clot for up to 6 months. I'll speak to a leading doctor. First, we've got the weather for you.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern. For many of us, it feels a bit more like winter once again, with strong winds from the north, but those winds are now easing. Showers clearing for many overnight, and it will be a cold night as this low pulls away. That leaving northerly winds and a cold airflow across much of the UK, and the winds stay brisk during the rest of Thursday before eventually easing inland overnight. And actually, there'll be further showers for a time before they also ease inland overnight. But coastal parts continue to see showers come and go, and with those showers falling as rain, sleet, hail and snow for northern Scotland, some icy patches around first thing. Certainly a widespread frost tomorrow morning, clear spells, but temperatures around 0 or a touch below in some sheltered spots. Frost-free meanwhile for the far south of England. Here, cloudier skies greet us and a few light outbreaks of rain just skirting the south coast throughout much of Friday. Eventually, brighter skies follow, but for much of the UK, it's a case of sunny spells and showers during Friday. A brisk wind continues, but not as strong as today, and that wind continuing to bring showers in from the north. Now, 12 Celsius in the south, 10, 11 Celsius for northern England. I think 8 or 9 for much of Scotland, so it will feel cold in the wind. And there'll be further showers of a wintry nature coming into parts of Wales, northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Rain and hail at lower levels, snow above around 150 metres. So a frosty start to the weekend, but a bright start once again. And with lighter winds and a bit more sunshine around, Saturday looks like a more cheerful day compared to Thursday and Friday. In fact, showers will be mostly confined to northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, North Wales. Otherwise, plenty of fine and bright weather. And Sunday starts once again with a widespread frost. But for the vast majority, it'll be a dry and bright day.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Now, a study from Sweden suggests that after a COVID infection, there is an increased risk of developing a blood clot for the next 6 months. The research found people with severe COVID and those infected during the first wave had the highest clot risk. This highlights the importance of being vaccinated against the virus, say the researchers. Let's turn to NHS GP, Dr. Mo Kaki, who joins me very soon indeed. Shall I turn to Peter Whittle just to... There is Dr. Mo. we couldn't find the right button. There you are. Thanks ever so much. Now, this is, in terms of blood clot risks, this is a risk of increased pulmonary embolism, so on the lungs, but also deep vein thrombosis, clot in the legs. And this is anything up to between 3 for the legs and 6 months for the lungs. Do I read that right?
You do, yes. 6 in the lungs and 3 in the legs. But also for the next couple of months, so the 2 months afterwards, you can also have an increased risk of bleeding or a stroke, for example. So what we know is that this study has picked up and followed 1 million people. So it's a significant amount in Sweden. And the fact that they've had those findings demonstrate that really the risk of this virus on our blood clotting system is quite significant. And the effects, of course, with that is also quite significant. So I think we need to take this quite seriously and really think about the implications of it.
It's metadata. It's a major study, 1 million subjects, but these are people who've not had mild COVID. I mean, that seems to be part of it. These are people who had COVID to a pretty debilitating degree.
Well, there are some in there who've had mild to moderate COVID. Of course, the risk is much more significant with the level of COVID you've had. If you've been hospitalised or if you've been really unwell with it, you've had a severe case, you have a significantly higher chance. And I think that's what...
Oh, yeah, sorry, carry on, Mo. No, there's a cable missing somewhere, isn't there? The gremlins are at work today. I do apologise to Mo Karki, who got the message across about that study being big and reliable. Peter Whittle's alongside me, thank goodness. Any medical ailments you want to share with the viewers?
Well, I'm one of those very fortunate people that went through the whole pandemic. I didn't sort of get anything.
Yeah.
I had the double shot, but not the booster. But basically, no, it's a... My mother had deep vein thrombosis, right? And that's.
But this was one of the reasons. If you think back to the vaccine, the jabs, and the Oxford. You remember some of the stuff coming out of France, from Germany, saying, "Well, we're not sure about the Oxford vaccine because of the clotting risk." I mean, it went political for a while as well as medical.
Yes, it did. I mean, I think maybe more and more of this might come up. I remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, if I can be a little bit trivial for a moment, there was a flurry of news from research showing that smokers were actually in quite a good position.
Yeah. Was that true?
Well, apparently, according to the disproportionate amount of smokers, or should I say hugely disproportionate, I mean, very small amount who went on into hospital and all the rest. So for a while, as a smoker, I was sort of very pleased with that. But I mean, obviously, a lot of people are very worried about these various different, things that are coming through now.
And we keep on learning more, don't
Yes,
we? Peter Fernand, thanks very much indeed. It's just gone 5 o'clock. And coming up live at 5, 60 years ago, the UK was the world leader in nuclear power. Did Boris Johnson today press the restart switch on the energy policy Britain forgot it was good at? Also, Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow, once a retail destination, thronging with shoppers, now a pale imitation of what it once was. Can anything be done to save one of Scotland's most famous high streets? And if you look at the league table of car sales in Britain, as of this week, Teslas, they now occupy first and second spot. I'll talk to car dealer Danny Kelly. Alongside me throughout today's show, the founder of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. But first, the headlines with Simon.
Thanks, Colin. It's just gone 5 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Let's bring you some breaking news that we're getting, and that is that Russia has been suspended from the UN Human Rights Council. 93 countries voted in favour of the move at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. 24 voted against. 58 countries abstained. It's after Ukraine accused Russia of war crimes, saying troops have killed dozens of civilians in the town of Bucha, and we will bring you reaction to that vote in our next bulletins. Meanwhile, NATO members have agreed to strengthen support for Ukraine following a meeting with foreign ministers. Ukraine's foreign minister says although sanctions are enough to inflict damage on the Russian economy, they're not enough to stop the war. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says they're ready to provide a wide range of weapons systems to the country.
Allies are also supporting and stepping up humanitarian aid and financial support. We discussed what more we will do, including cyber security assistance and providing equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical and biological threats.
The UK is banning all imports of Russian energy and stepping up its supply of weapons to Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss revealed the new measures at a NATO gathering of foreign ministers in Brussels. Ukraine's foreign minister says the country needs more weapons from its allies to repel Russian forces. In other news, the Prime Minister has defended the government's energy strategy after Labour criticised the plan as too little, too late. The government says it wants to reduce the UK's dependence on overseas oil and gas by creating more nuclear, wind, solar and hydrogen power facilities. Under the plan, up to 8 nuclear reactors will be delivered by 2030. Visiting Hinkley Point C, Boris Johnson said the strategy is about making sure the UK is never blackmailed by people like Vladimir Putin again.
This is about tackling some of the mistakes of the past and making sure that we are set well for the future. We're no longer subject to, we're never again subject to the vagaries of the global oil or gas price. We can't be subject to blackmail, as it were, from people such as Vladimir Putin. We have energy security here in the UK.
However, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the measures failed to address the issues people face now.
This won't help those who only last week saw their energy bills go up by hundreds of pounds. What they want from the government is a response that meets that challenge. This list, this cobbled together list of things that could and should have been done over the last 10 to 12 years isn't enough. And, you know, it leaves, because of political squabbling, it leaves out of account really important initiatives like keeping homes warm, insulating homes, which I've seen for myself, can make a huge difference and reduce bills by up to £400. That's the sort of real action we were looking for today.
A security guard who worked at the British Embassy in Berlin has denied spying for Russia. David Smith, who was extradited from Germany, pleaded not guilty to 9 offences under the Official Secrets Act at Westminster Magistrates Court. He's due to reappear at the Old Bailey next week. A search and rescue mission has resumed to look for a British man and his teenage son who went missing on a diving trip in Malaysia yesterday. 46-year-old Adrian Chesters and his 14-year-old Dutch son Nathan were reported missing with 2 others whilst diving near the coastal town of Mersing. A 35-year-old Norwegian woman has been rescued and taken to hospital. She told authorities she lost sight of the divers after the group drifted far from their boat due to strong underwater currents. A French national is still unaccounted for. More than 750,000 people in the UK have reported having long COVID for more than a year. The Office for National Statistics estimates 1.7 million people were likely to be experiencing symptoms in February. The new data also shows long COVID symptoms are estimated to be affecting the day-to-day activities of 1.1 million people. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
5:05. Now, for Brits who live near Salisbury Plain or Catterick Garrison, the sight of army vehicles is not new. Many of the lighter vehicles still bear the desert camouflage they needed in Afghanistan or Iraq. But might some of those vehicles soon be leaving Wiltshire or North Yorkshire for Ukraine? Well, it's reported today in the Times that so-called protected patrol vehicles will be offered to Ukrainian soldiers. The vehicles include the Mastiff or the Jackal, which can be used as a reconnaissance or long-range patrol vehicle, 2 different types of vehicle. So not quite offensive weaponry like a tank, but still something which could allow Ukrainian infantry to move closer to Russian front lines. Let's turn to Colonel Richard Kemp, a retired British Army officer. Richard, on the point about these vehicles, it is another little step inching towards more military assistance.
Yeah, I think it's very important as well. We've already seen that Ukraine is being provided with a small number of T-72 tanks to help them fight the Russians. We don't have the kind of tanks in our armed forces that would be useful to the Ukrainians. It would require a great deal of training for them to be able to not only use but also maintain our tanks. But the kind of vehicle you mentioned, the Mastiff and the Jackal, are relatively simple vehicles. They're wheeled vehicles, but they have armoured protection. They have the capability of mounting machine guns on them and therefore are available for use for offensive operations, the kind of offensive operations that the Ukrainians hopefully will now be conducting more effectively against the Russians. So yeah, it's a really important step forward and something we should, do our best to develop even more if we possibly can. The more we can supply them with these armoured vehicles, the more effective they're going to be.
Yeah, I just wonder whether its value is more symbolic than practical, because as described, and people will have seen these vehicles in footage from Afghanistan and Iraq, and essentially they're slightly more mobile, agile versions of bigger of Land Rovers. I mean, you could almost the job they're going to be doing if they get sent, if they get used on the front lines, is not that different from what a civilian SUV would do.
Well, that's to an extent true, but they are, in fact, they're quite heavily armoured. They're well protected. You can manoeuvre across country depending on the terrain, but you can manoeuvre across country in these vehicles in a way you couldn't with a normal SUV. And as I say, they can mount machine guns on them. They can provide protected mobility, which means that you can move forward fire support. You can move forward infantry soldiers in these vehicles with a degree of protection, maybe supporting tanks or somewhere near tank operations. So they are, I wouldn't characterise their use as symbolic. They were very effective in Afghanistan, I think, particularly, and they will be very helpful, very useful for the Ukrainians.
But I mean, you know far better than I, obviously, Richard. But I mean, my recollection is they were answering a call in Afghanistan and Iraq from British soldiers who were sick of being blown up in lightly skinned Land Rovers, and therefore a lot of the protection they offered was on the underside from these big IEDs and mines that were unfortunately successfully killing quite a lot of our people. I mean, I'm splitting hairs slightly. I'm just wondering really how much of a difference it's going to make. And actually, you also, just on that point of what difference it makes, we talked about the Czechs supplying those T-72s. I think a dozen I'd read. So again, it just feels a bit symbolic rather than practical.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and I think they need more tanks. They need tanks. They need the kind of tanks they know how to use. They couldn't use our tanks, albeit we've only got a very small number ourselves. But they couldn't use our tanks without a great deal of training and without probably us sending in people to help maintain them. They do need a very high level of maintenance. So I don't think that's really a viable solution at the moment. Maybe long term it would be, but we should be doing everything we can to find and help fund and ship tanks out of the type that they can use, that they used to, like the T-72, from other countries in Eastern Europe that have them. We should be helping with that as well. And the other type of vehicle that is very useful is the BMP, the armoured personnel carrier, that again is a Russian armoured personnel carrier that they will know how to use, or some of them will, and provide not only protection but also very, very effective mobility with tracked vehicles and a great deal of firepower in them as well. So these are what they really do need. We don't have them, but we should not only provide what we do have, which is the Jackal and the Mastiff, but also we should be doing whatever we can to try and source these vehicles from wherever they can be got from to get out to the Ukrainians.
Richard, just a final brief point. Con Coughlin, very respected foreign policy commentator in the Telegraph today, points out that we've recklessly squandered our supply of armoured vehicles, in particular main battle tanks. He reckons that if we were to send our entire armoured corps to fight now, you'd be lucky to muster 40 tanks.
I'm afraid to say that he's probably not far from the truth there. Many people have been saying this for years, that running down British defence in the way it's been run down was a serious mistake, an error of judgment, and actually in some ways criminal, because it leaves us in a situation where if let's say we have to fight the Russians, we might have to, it's looking increasingly likely we will have to, we don't really have the wherewithal to do so. We have maybe 40 tanks that work at the moment, immediately can be brought into use. Maybe we've got some more that can be brought up in relatively quick time, but not a huge amount, not a vast number. We made a decision last year to scrap all of our armoured infantry combat vehicles, the kind of BMP type vehicle I was talking about just a short while ago. We decided to scrap all of them. It actually does amount to almost criminal negligence and misjudgment on the part of the British government to put us in a position where we're here, where we really can't effectively defend our country against an armed force like the Russians.
Richard Kemp, as always, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. I'm going to turn to Peter Whittle to reflect on some breaking news from the last 5-10 minutes or so. You heard it in the bulletin that the UN General Assembly has just voted to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. It's only the second time, apparently, Peter, that a member of the Human Rights Council has been expelled. Libya was expelled in 2011. If you remember, back in the early 2000s, there was a slew of countries holding the revolving chairmanship at the Human Rights Council, including countries, I think, like Iraq and Libya. It all felt a bit daft. Well, anyway, it's been expelled.
I mean, this I think is something which is inevitable and should happen. I mean, there's no question about that. Russia has brought, in some ways, in a practical sense, the Western world, with some exceptions, together in a kind of practical way, and I'm pleased about that, in their response. So I think these sort of things are symbolic in a way, but they're important.
When Richard Kemp, experienced military man, says at some point our young men and women are going to be fighting their Russian counterparts soon, does he overstate it?
Well, one hopes not. Obviously, absolutely. What I really did pick up from him, and I was nodding along, was when he said it was almost criminal, the way in which our defences have over time been sort of, reduced by a political class that I would say does not quite understand anything very military. It's lived in a very peaceful time. It doesn't understand necessarily force and all the. We've suddenly woke up to this. Over the past month, 6 weeks. But what he was talking about, really sort of struck a chord with me. This has been Tory governments and Labour. It's not been anything particularly political, oddly, about it. It's just been this idea that we're in a new era. Suddenly we realise, no, we're not.
Well, that's the subject is long-term planning. That feeds effortlessly into our next story. The Prime Minister has put nuclear at the heart of his new energy strategy. It sets out a plan for Britain to draw about a quarter of its power from reactors. As many as 4 new nuclear power stations and scores of smaller reactors will have to be built to quadruple the country's nuclear energy capacity. Nuclear is clean and reliable, but it's not cheap and it can't be delivered quickly. The ban on fracking, meanwhile, which could deliver cheap power quickly, will remain, at least for now. The massive expansion in wind and solar, both of which can be expensive, will persist. Is the energy plan a welcome shift then away from the wishful thinking, as some see it, of net zero, or a slow and expensive response to the energy crisis? Joining me now is Peter Aldous, the Conservative MP for Waveney in Suffolk, who's also a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Nuclear. Welcome to you. I mentioned we were just talking about long-term planning in the context of military procurement, but heaven knows that can be applied to energy. It feels like, after 30 years of dither, in 3 weeks we've made a decision.
I think that is correct. I think energy, you need to plan very long term over a 50-year cycle. And the problem is the political cycle doesn't coincide with that. Politicians, governments tend to just look at the immediate 5 years. And as a result, you get short-term planning and responding to short-term challenges, and ultimately nothing happens. So I think as a long-term strategy today, it's a long-term energy supply strategy. There are a lot of other cost of living strategy problems that we do need to address, but as a long-term energy supply strategy, it is a very much a welcome move in the right direction, and I think the Prime Minister's right on this one.
Peter Aldous, I'm delighted you're here to talk to us, particularly with your expertise on the All-Party Nuclear Group. But I really wanted to talk to somebody today who's in the nuclear industry, who can talk about what this will mean for these highly skilled nuclear jobs. Now, I know that Sizewell's not actually in your constituency, but it's pretty close by. But is there going to be a revolution in recruitment for nuclear engineers, the people who build these places, maintain these places? Are we really going to recapture that cutting-edge lead that Britain had in the 1950s? People have seen the black and white footage, the men in white coats, the boffins. Is that possible? How revolutionary could this be?
I think it is possible. I think the nuclear experts are still there, and it is actually, I think, a tragedy that we had an industry that was very successful for the latter part of the 20th century, and we now got a position whereby there's going to be a 30-year pause between the last nuclear power station built, which was Sizewell B, and then now Hinkley C coming online in the next 5 or 6 years. And we've got to get back to doing this for continuous supply. And I think if I look at my own constituency, which is very close to Sizewell, there can bring enormous jobs in the over the construction period over the next 12 years, and I'm assuming obviously the development consent order is with the Secretary of State on that, but they can bring enormous benefits to the local economy in that construction period, and thereafter we can leave a legacy of skills that then can attract new business to the area. And a lot of the nuclear power stations, they tend to be in coastal areas, very often areas that have their own economic challenges, and they are very much part of the whole levelling up and building back better agenda.
Peter Aldous, got to leave it there, I'm afraid, but appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
It was once one of Glasgow's most popular shopping destinations. Sadly, times have changed, and Sauchiehall Street, where on average a store lies empty every 25 metres of its full 1.1 kilometre length. With the news that Marks and Spencer is also going to close its store there, shoppers fear its heart has gone really for good. Glasgow City Council has announced a £2 million rescue package for the city centre, including renovation plans and funding for a clean-up. Will it be enough to breathe life back into Glasgow City Centre? Let's turn to a Glasgow City Councillor, Thomas Kerr. Thomas, welcome to you, and I appreciate your time. What I just read could apply to I think literally dozens of other city centres throughout our island, and you get an anchor store. In this case, it's M&S. It goes, and you see that slow trickle effect. Other sort of high street brands start to go with them, and that process, we've seen it again and again and again, and it just feels unstoppable, depressingly so.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. But there's a bit of a difference in what's happening in Glasgow. It's not just Sauchiehall Street's obviously one of the main streets, but there's the famous Z, as we used to call it, because you have Buchanan Street and Argyll Street. Argyll Street was the first one to really be hammered by what's been going on over the past few years, and now Sauchiehall Street and Buchanan Street starting to seep on as well. So there's a big issue with our city centre. And the £2 million that's been announced, I don't believe goes far enough. I think we need more money, and I think we need new ideas, because the current thinking is that we just have a wee spruce up right down the street and put in a wee bit of more money and that's going to fix the issues. That's not the case at all. I think we need fresh leadership, and I think we need fresh ideas to try and make sure we renovate the entire city centre of Glasgow.
The thing is, I mean, you switch on the radio, you switch on the telly, you open a newspaper, and there's a retail expert with a plan to save the high street. They've been coming up with plans for what feels like years now, and I'm sure somebody's shouting at the telly or the radio and saying, but it's worked in my town. I can't think of one. What might work in your view?
I think we need to try and bring in investment into Glasgow City Centre. If you look at Manchester City Centre, that's one of the ones I always compare Glasgow with, because it's quite similar in demographics, it's quite similar in the state of how the city is. Manchester's been able to bring in big private investment, big different businesses and everything else all into the city centre because they've created a business-friendly atmosphere. In Glasgow, the council that's currently being run by the SNP doesn't have that atmosphere. Instead, they turn off businesses. They see private investment in enterprise as a bad thing. I think we need to try and free up planning legislation to make sure we're bringing more investment in. I think we need to try and make sure that we're making the city centre more attractive for people to want to invest in the city centre. There's a whole range of measures that my group has launched, and we launched a Glasgow Conservative Business Manifesto to specifically talk about the city centre and how we try and reimagine it for the future, because you are right, it's happening right across, but I think Glasgow's been damaged dramatically.
Well,
and right now we don't have the leadership to do it.
Yeah, Thomas, I just wondered to what extent you think it's these problems are to some degree bespoke to Glasgow, and not just the problems that other big city centres have suffered from as well. I mean, when you think about the decline of heavy industry on the Clyde, and to some degree the depopulation that Glasgow has seen from being this, I'm going to use the phrase, great city of empire. I'm sorry if some people find that objectionable, but it was, wasn't it? It was the great second city of empire, and it's a much changed place. So you're trying to push water up a hill in a sense, because the money is left to a great degree.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And in terms of the population of Glasgow, that's one of the big issues. One of the things that I very rarely agree with the administration on in Glasgow, one of the things they did good was they launched a city centre living strategy to bring more people into the city centre. Because when you bring in more people to stay there, you're getting these city centres used a lot more. But the problem with that is it's very slow. They've not, they spoke for 5 years. I've been on the council for 5 years. We've heard big ideas for 5 years and we've had no action. It's time that the administration start to take this seriously. And I think that the city centre living strategy is a part of that, but we need to then look at the bigger issues. How do we bring in more investment? How do we bring in more businesses? I think there's ways to do that. I think that Glasgow has been dramatically declining over the years from colours of both political parties, the SNP and Labour. It's been something that's been happening under their watch for a number of years, and I think it's been a slow decline, and it's something that they've not taken seriously, and they've just kind of kicked the can down the road, and it's now ended up where we've got Sauchiehall Street looking like a desert town, and that's what the city centre does look like now.
Thomas Kerr, it's a sad story. Appreciate you coming on to talk about it, though. Thanks very much indeed. Peter Whittle, what can be done, if anything?
Well, you were talking about investment, and of course that would be good, but I can't help feeling, and I so regret saying this, because I grew up with the High Street as very much part of my childhood, teenage years and onward. People have got to want to use it.
It's like pubs, isn't it? Everybody loves pubs, but nobody goes to them.
There used to be this whole argument about the corner shop. Do you remember? Like, we've got to save the corner shop. It would end up being more expensive if you go there than if you go to the supermarket, but that's the only way to save it. And I can't help feeling it's the same very much with the High Street. All that's happened, it's a cliche now to say this, all that's happened is that the pandemic has hastened the decline. But I mean, in London, when I think back, I grew up in Woolwich in South East London. 3 department stores back in the 1960s, 3 department stores in the 1960s and 70s, bustling High Street, the very first McDonald's ever. Now it's pretty much a shadow of its former self, and I think there's an awful lot of coffee outlets and things like that,
charity
phone
shops.
Outlets and charity shops.
And there's a huge amount of nostalgia. I don't mean that unkindly. I mean, I was talking to a colleague who was talking about Sauchiehall Street. He used to go there as a child. It was thronged with people, busy, pulsating. And it's a pale imitation of that now, and that's repeated across the country. Well, people mourn it. They mourn the loss.
I think because it's about the thing that's actually gone through so much of what we've talked about today, and that is collective experience where the community's alive in this, as opposed to, very, very individual,
Atomised.
very, very atomised at home. And I think it's a great shame. I just think there's an inevitability about it.
OK, Peter, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, discussing the possible outcomes of the French election, I'll share with you the results of an extraordinary poll from France, which has just been released. Really extraordinary. Is Marine Le Pen emerging as a serious challenger to President Macron?
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
French politics, no, don't switch off. It's an interesting twist to the story, this. The gap between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen in the French presidential election is now within the margin of error. In the first round of voting, it takes place on Sunday, Macron is polling at 26.5%, Le Pen at 21.5%. Different poll says that Macron is only up by 3% against his rival for the 24th of April runoff. In fact, before I ask this question, let me just share with you the latest poll, because this is breaking news, folks. Atlas Politico is saying that when it comes to the second round, if those two make it to the second round, the final runoff, Le Pen is polling 50.5% and Macron 49.5%. That would amount to some political earthquake, wouldn't it? Atlas Politico poll. What's caused this apparent resurrection then for Le Pen? That was a description used in a recent piece in Unheard by my next guest, and that is the Paris columnist for The Telegraph, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Anne-Elisabeth, welcome to you. Just on this Atlas Politico poll, I've seen it on Twitter. It sounds plausible. What do you make of it?
It is possible, and it is also within the margin of error, but it shows a trend. The trend is that Emmanuel Macron, since the upset of the beginning of the war in Ukraine that saw him shoot up to over 30% in the first round and gave him a comfortable majority for the second round, he's gone down just for the first round almost 10 points. That is huge. That is really a very big thing, essentially because he felt that since he appeared as a statesman, since he was going to see Vladimir Putin and was on the telephone to him all the time, he did not need to campaign. And he eventually gave one single rally at a large meeting hall called the Arena at La Défense, just west Paris. But that wasn't enough, and there was a feeling, which is a feeling that comforted reactions to his sort of slightly aloof presidency in the past 5 years, that he despised both the idea of campaigning and the people he ought to campaign to. You see right now on the screen images of him being sort of hugging citizens as he's trying to make up for his sort of interest deficit towards the French. But it may not be enough.
Apologies if you're listening on GB News Radio, but as Anne-Elisabeth describes it, it's Macron pressing the flesh. Read your piece in Unheard, Anne-Elisabeth. I mean, fascinating, that sense in which Marine Le Pen has sought to detoxify her brand. Can we just pitch forward? And you didn't address this necessarily in your piece, how could you? What would France look like under Marine Le Pen?
That would really be interesting, because the question is, who is she going to govern with? Because what we have after the second round, which is on the 24th of April, 1 month later, and that distance, it's little over a month, it's exactly 40 days, before we have the general election, the legislative elections to the House. And she has people elected in some regions, but would she have a majority in the House? That is very, very unlikely. And the question is, does she have coattails? The strategy, which was, even if I don't win, I'm going to have an alliance with that part of the right, of the centre-right that is compatible with me. That was Éric Zemmour, the upset candidate who came out of nowhere, or rather from a job as a columnist at Le Figaro. And he knew everybody in politics because he'd been a political journalist for 30 years. And even though he is perceived generally as being more aggressive and more right-wing, if you will, than Marine Le Pen, although that is debatable, he was the one who said the union of the right should be a new big tent party that would forget those people who are so centre-right that they're centrists and practically Macronist, and create a new right-wing party that could be a big tent party, like something out of the right wing of the Tory party, plus, say, Nigel Farage. It was something that was building towards the future and rebuilding something that would be immediately identifiable. But Marine Le Pen has never been able to ally herself to any kind of democratic party on the right, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens if she wins. Does she have movement or not? And what kind of policies does she foster? She's very left-wing in terms of her social policies. She's been talking about more benefits for French people, not foreigners, not immigrants. She's been talking about fewer taxes. She doesn't necessarily say how she funds it. And the other part of the program, the international program, is also a mystery, because, as we know, she has received twice loans from banks that were co-owned by Russians, about 10 million euros each time to finance her campaign. She couldn't find French banks. French banks were virtue signaling. We know certainly that she still says that the invasion of Ukraine was wrong, but one should negotiate with Putin. So we don't know exactly what it looks like. We also do not know how the country is going to react to that. So it's a very big mystery.
And that, Anne Elizabeth, that is a bigger question altogether, isn't it? For now, we'll leave it there. Anne Elizabeth Moutet, absolutely fascinating stuff. Thanks very much indeed. Peter Whittle alongside me. Couldn't happen, could it?
Well, her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who's generally reviled now, came very close back in 2002. Not quite as close as this. You can't help feeling that if the political establishment in France really thought there was a chance of this, then I don't know, somehow or other, they would kind of get together to somehow stop her, I imagine. Obviously, she has rebranded. The other thing as well is that at the last election, when she was one of the main contenders, she then did a very poor performance, gave a very poor performance in one of the debates, the main debate, and that really stalled her progress. So
she went into a funk for a couple of days and couldn't be seen.
Absolutely, yes. I think that the crucial thing here, though, Colin, you'd know, obviously, from all your years as a journalist, is that we look at these things in a certain way. You've got to remember there is a domestic situation in each country. And, you know, France is going through a real malaise, you know, of crime. And there's a lot of comment about Paris, even. What has happened to Paris? You know, it's now a bit of a dump. You know, some people are saying this sort of thing. There is a malaise and a lot of concern about Islamism and about immigration. These will all play to her. But it's a question of whether people really feel that she has changed, really, or whether it's just a superficial thing.
A malaise. It was nice to see you bring a bit of French in there. Thanks, Peter. Thanks. After the break, as Tesla becomes the UK's most sold car last month, we'll be asking, is this the beginning of Britain's electric car revolution? I rather think it started, don't you? It's the news with Simon.
It's 5:34. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Russia has been suspended from the UN Human Rights Council, with the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss saying the country is now a global pariah. The United Nations General Assembly saw 93 countries vote in favour of the move, while 24 were against. 58 countries abstained. The Foreign Secretary says the mounting evidence of war crimes in Ukraine means Moscow can no longer have a seat at the table. Meanwhile, NATO members have agreed to strengthen support for Ukraine. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says they are ready to provide a wide range of weapons system to the country. Ukraine's foreign minister says although sanctions are enough to inflict damage on the Russian economy, they're not enough to stop the war. In other news, the Prime Minister has defended the government's energy strategy after Labour criticised the plan as too little too late. The government says it wants to reduce the UK's dependence on overseas oil and gas by creating more nuclear, wind, solar and hydrogen power facilities. Under the plan, up to 8 nuclear reactors will be delivered by 2030. A security guard who worked at the British Embassy in Berlin has denied spying for Russia. David Smith, who was extradited from Germany, pleaded not guilty to 9 offences under the Official Secrets Act at Westminster Magistrates Court. He's due to return to the Old Bailey next week. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Colin will be back in just a moment.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Now, the family of the school teacher Sabina Nessa, who was killed last September by Kochi Sellamarge in south-east London, have today spoken of their grief and anger in court. Sellamarge pleaded guilty to her murder but did not attend court today. Alice Porter is our London reporter who's outside the Old Bailey. Alice.
Hi there, good afternoon. Well, it was an absolutely harrowing day in court, I have to say. We were shown CCTV footage showing the exact moment in which Sabina Nessa was attacked. You saw her walking along Cater Park in southeast London, and then Sellamarge came up, and while they'd sort of passed each other, he ran back and using a warning triangle, a metal one from his car, he struck her, and we saw this footage 34 times in the head, and he struck her with such ferocity that part of the triangle actually sort of came off in the ground, and he then dragged her, at that point, unconscious body out of sight, where it's understood that he strangled her, and it's also understood that it's believed that she was sexually assaulted as well because parts of her clothing were removed. So we also had some some impact statement, victim impact statement read out from her family, including Sabina Nessa's sister, Jabina Islam. And she talked about the fact that, yes, her sister was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but that she had every right to be there because, of course, Sabina Nessa was walking along the park, leaving her home to meet up with friends. And, of course, there's been a lot of discussion about the issue with women and their safety regarding that. So she gave out some very moving testimony, I think very much saying that the family are haunted by the fact that her body was discovered in this long grass that had been purposefully put over to her to try and hide the body. Her legs were sort of outstretched, and I think that sort of that visual image is something that clearly has very much haunted the family. There was also a victim statement which was also read out by the prosecution on behalf of the head teacher, Lisa Williams, at the school where Sabina Nessa was a teacher, and she said children will be tormented by the fact that their teacher was murdered. And I think you can get a sense there of the emotion that was in court today. The whole of Sabina Nessa's family were in tears, and I have to say many journalists, including myself, really were very moved by the entire afternoon, and I have to say I shed a few tears myself because really this was a family who have really, they were saying that their lives have been ripped apart by this brutal murder. And I think what really struck them was the fact that Sellamarge did not even attend court today, and I think throughout the whole police process he didn't answer questions, he's shown absolutely no remorse whatsoever, and I think this entire horrific crime has left an immense legacy really on the family.
Alice Porter, thank you. Now, the Tesla Model Y was the best-selling car in the UK last month, followed closely by its Tesla Model 3 sibling. They take the top spots amid a backdrop of declining registration caused by supply chain problems. The figures reflect, say some, the ongoing shake-up of Britain's traditional bestsellers list. Once the best-selling Ford Fiesta, well, it's now 10th on that list. Are these early warning signs that the UK is pulling a handbrake turn towards a very electric future? Should that worry you in any way? Broadcaster and car dealer Danny Kelly joins me, as you see. Danny, welcome to you. I have to say, when I read these figures, I didn't quite believe them. It was so used to Ford Focus, whatever it is, to being top of the bestseller list, and suddenly not just first place, but second place too. It's a revolution, really.
Completely, and there's no denying it, Colin. And what's interesting is that the other 8 cars in the top 10 are all offered with either a pure electric or a hybrid engine, which is, generally speaking, a petrol engine with a battery assistance. So, look, it's unstoppable, this. The new car sales, it's been the lowest since 1998. Which tells you a lot of things. I think you alluded to it earlier on in the show. There's a cost of living crisis. You have the Just Stop Oil loonies who over the last 48 hours have brought Leamington Spa and Warwick to a standstill because people are panic buying. And of course, the motorists who are feeling rather smug at the moment are those who have invested in either a hybrid engine or indeed an electric car. It's unstoppable, Colin. The car game, though, there's a number of reasons why new car sales are down, and we're going to go back to pre-COVID when there wasn't a supply chain problem with the microchips, and that is still hindering new car sales. But we can't deny the success of these hybrids and the pure electric cars because they rely equally as much on computer microchips as well. But I tell you what, Colin, the headline that I've taken from this, besides electric cars flying through the sky, is diesel sales. Diesels are down now to 5.6%
Wow.
of all new cars. 5.6.
And Danny, you know, these electric cars, these Teslas, I mean, they ain't cheap. It's not a Ford Fiesta that you're paying for. And so for all that new car sales are low historically by volume across the piece, people are shelling out a lot of money to buy one. Is that partly because we're talking about company cars here? I know one of the big rental, was it Hertz, said all our cars will be electric from now on. I mean, is there a bit of corporate virtue signalling going on? Is that a bit cruel? What's the picture?
No, I think there could be some virtue signalling. A neighbour of mine recently was given an Audi all-electric car because all of his fleet, of which consisted of hundreds of vehicles, were going electric. Now, you have to ask the question, was that virtue signalling? These cars aren't very cheap at all, Colin. In fact, if you try and get 1 penny off a Tesla, you'll be shown the door. You can't get anything off these electric cars. It's one of the basic tenets of capitalism, supply and demand. Personally, my view on electric cars, being a used car dealer, is that I won't touch them at the moment. I think that I'll be forced to touch them in the next 5 or 6 years. I'm relying on a healthy used car market because of the new car supply and demand problems. Used car prices are going through the roof. But even though there's a cost of living crisis, Colin, just to get back to your point, if you have enough money in the bank not to be affected by the price of your gas or electric bills, then that's not going to do a 60 or even £110,000 Tesla.
Danny, silly question. I apologise for it in advance. Is there a used car market in Teslas?
Very much so, and it's strong, Colin. But I won't touch them, and I tell you why I won't touch them, because even Tesla themselves, they factor in over, I think it's either 4 or 5 years, they factor in a 30% degradation into their battery. So a Tesla, if you go into a showroom and they'll boast that you can do 396 miles on day one, well, after year 4 or 5, that is going to be factored down by 30%. And I'm a used car dealer who has to sell quality products and not cars that are only going to travel for 70% of their distance. But there is a used car market for Teslas, definitely.
Danny Kelly, as always, really good to talk to you, really refreshing. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Peter Whittle's alongside me. He's already warned me he knows absolutely nothing about Teslas. Do you have anything to add?
It's fascinating listening to him, actually. I mean, it's a statistic about 1997, did he say 98? The car sales are the lowest since that point.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
I wonder who is... You mentioned a corporate... I wonder who's actually buying cars.
But also, Danny's point about diesel sales going through the floor, I mean, what is it, 20 years ago, scientists and the government were urging the take-up of diesel cars because they were, quote, good for the environment.
Exactly. I think the thing I take away, where obviously the whole, green message has actually gone much deeper than maybe one appreciated. If Teslas are number 1 and number 2 at the top of the charts, then that is really something. That's extraordinary, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we'll maybe come back to this a little later on, but I appreciate you've demonstrated fully your lack of awareness of how Teslas work, and you did a really good job on that. Thanks, Peter.
Oh dear.
No, it's fine. You're coming back. We're going to move on to an altogether more serious story. More than 2.5 million refugees have entered Poland since the start of the Ukraine-Russia war. So says the UN, which has in the last hour or thereabouts in New York, suspended Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Council. I suppose you'd expect that, wouldn't you? Well, in terms of those refugee flows, what Poland has done is an act of enormous national generosity. It's going to cost them dear. It's caused concerns there about the country's ability, really, to cope with such a huge and sudden influx of human beings. My next guest, we've talked to him before, Patrick Ney. Patrick's a British national based in Poland who has welcomed Ukrainian refugees into his home. And in a sense, Patrick, I think we last talked about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and the refugee crisis was absolutely at its most poignant in a sense. Have things settled down a bit?
They have and they haven't. I think when we last spoke, I talked about the situation at the border as being a kind of controlled chaos. I think it's now controlled. The huge army of volunteers, private citizens that were driving to the border, I was one of them, to pick people up and bring them back, has mostly been replaced now by the effort of the government and the local government. So Poland as a country has got its act together. But of course, these people have to go somewhere. And you won't see tents and rows of tents anywhere in Poland, because the vast majority of these millions of Ukrainian women and children are staying in people's houses. So I think it's changed quite a bit, but I walked out in the street, 3 cars in the 20 cars outside with Ukrainian number plates. There's Ukrainian flags on the building opposite. The war is still very, very present on Polish streets and in Polish minds.
You know, Poland's physically a big country. It's got a big hinterland. Is that where they're heading, or are they, as is the way often when you get diasporas forming, people go where somebody they know or a cousin is, and then you get these sort of incremental build-up around one town, one community, one city. It's probably quite early for that to be happening, I imagine.
Well, many people think the Polish people aren't very friendly to foreigners, but the simple fact is that they'd already taken in well over 1 million Ukrainians before this war began. And Poland had issued visa-free travel to Ukrainian people, and I worked with a lot of Ukrainian people who came to Poland. So the people who've stayed, quite a lot of them already have a family member here. Many of the people who stayed with me have gone on to family members, some over to Germany, some to Spain, some to the west of Poland. So it depends on their individual circumstances. But there are just a vast number of people who are, frankly speaking, Colin, they don't want to be here. They don't want to be anywhere. They don't want to come to the UK. They just want to go home.
But when we see the fallen masonry, the rubble, the wrecked roads, the infrastructure shattered, the power that's not going to work for years, the billions that it's going to cost to rebuild that country, where are the jobs going to be? I mean, you can see why, if women and children will want to go back, be reunited with their men folk. It's a perfectly understandable, natural impulse. But you wonder really whether there are going to be the jobs and the work and the money to sustain them.
Oh, that is an interesting question. And you're quite right to say, Colin, that people have said, hang on a second, this is all very well and fine. What are we going to do long term? I have to tell you, having met these people, I think these people would be a credit to any workforce, any of them. These are teachers, the people who are in my house today. One's an experienced teacher, the other's an experienced architect. And you know what? We went onto a Polish website, and there's several hundred Polish architecture companies offering people like her work. So just like in the UK, finding good workers is kind of tough.
Yeah.
There's 1.5 million jobs in the UK. There's millions of jobs in Poland. And I think actually their integration in Poland will be quite good for one simple reason. They are, in many respects, very similar to Polish people. The food is similar. I can speak to Ukrainians and kind of in a gabbled way work out what on earth is going on. I was playing with a Ukrainian child, 2 years old. We were getting on like a house on fire. So the overall story of their integration, I think, will be good, but there'll certainly be bumps along the road. And yeah, many of them are in limbo. I mean, they're saying to me, they don't really want to start a job here. They don't want to let an employer down. They don't want to sign a lease on a flat or an apartment if in 2 months' time they can go back. And of course, they thought those peace deals would come through. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, you put your finger on exactly the right point, Patrick, which is the time factor. If you look at the graph, it's the numbers here, but it's the time on the bottom, isn't it? If it goes on for months, if it goes on for years, then some of those temporary arrangements take on a feel of permanence, and the idea of where home actually is begins to mutate and change.
Yes, you're right. And of course, who knows that better than Poland? I mean, Colin, as you know well, 1 in every 5 Polish people were killed in the Second World War. The other lot were robbed and injured and cast aside from their country, never to come back. So we don't know. And obviously, I feel terribly sorry for all of these people. The murders of these civilians is breaking their hearts. Like, I was speaking to a Ukrainian friend of mine, Anastasia, this morning, and she just can't talk about it. So these people are going through a trauma, and it's a trauma which is it's evolving, because now, as you say, they're stuck here. They're stuck in this limbo land. They are these refugees, people without a state. And I feel terribly sorry for them for that reason, that, of course, you have to also move on. And we're now in this horrible period where the shock of the war has worn off. And they are stuck waiting for news about their loved ones. We're all waiting to find out what's going to happen in this war. And of course, unfortunately, there's only one person really who can decide that.
Patrick, it's nice to talk to you again. I hope you're keeping well. Patrick Ney, thanks very much indeed. Peter Whittle is alongside me here. Enjoyed having you along today.
Thank you. Great.
We finish on a sombre note.
Yeah.
People like Patrick Ney are doing a lot as individuals. Poland has sort of rehabilitated itself in the eyes of Brussels, which took a dim view of it before.
Yes, absolutely. It's a sombre note, you might say, but also actually a very life-affirming one, to see what people have done for these refugees. I mean, I've just been in Hungary, and Hungary's got a border with Ukraine, and they've taken about
500,000.
Yes, getting on for 400,000 refugees, and you're talking about a country, in Hungary's case, which is just under 10 million people.
Yeah.
So that's a significant amount of people, and I think it is quite remarkable, and it's a great endorsement of the human spirit, I think. So it's I think it's wonderful. But obviously, the long term, many of these people, I imagine, just as our friend there said, want to go back. They just want to go home.
You run a think tank. Final thought, Peter. You run a think tank, New Culture Forum. You're thinking hard about the culture wars. What, in terms of how this moves on, those points of friction about how societies run, do you take any big lessons so far? I mean, the obvious one that people were making at the beginning was, you look at your own troubles. Does it really matter what your pronoun is if you're being bombed?
I would like to be able to say, just at the beginning, it's just the same with the beginning of the pandemic. People saying, oh, all this navel gazing and all of this is self-indulgent rubbish. We'll see the end of it. I'm afraid not on that front. I think that they are so entrenched, those people, and it's going on, and you're reporting on it every day, all the kind of culture war thing, which I think is happening. It's just incredibly important, to the health of a society, because it's so demoralising. So I would be nice to be able to say, oh, we're looking at things anew now, and that doesn't matter. I'm afraid it does. However, what I also think is very good about this is that people have had, when they've looked at Ukraine and they've looked at the way that they have resisted, it has been inspiring. And so basically it has, I think, given us a bit of a kick where we needed it as well, if one's going to be, egotistical about it.
OK. Peter Whittle, been lovely having you in. Thanks ever so much. Just to remind you, Russia's been suspended from the UN Human Rights Council. Jubes & Co. is next. Do stay with us.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern. For many of us, it feels a bit more like winter once again, with strong winds from the north, but those winds are now easing. Showers clearing for many overnight, and it will be a cold night as this low pulls away. That leaving northerly winds and a cold airflow across much of the UK, and the winds stay brisk during the rest of Thursday before eventually easing inland overnight. And actually, there'll be further showers for a time before they also ease inland overnight. But coastal parts continue to see showers come and go, and with those showers falling as rain, sleet, hail and snow for northern Scotland, some icy patches around first thing. Certainly a widespread frost tomorrow morning, clear spells, but temperatures around 0 or a touch below in some sheltered spots. Frost-free, meanwhile, for the far south of England. Here, cloudier skies greet us and a few light outbreaks of rain just skirting the south coast throughout much of Friday. Eventually, brighter skies follow, but for much of the UK, it's a case of sunny spells and showers during Friday. A brisk wind continues, but not as strong as today, and that wind continuing to bring showers in from the north. Now, 12 Celsius in the south, 10, 11 Celsius for northern England. I think 8 or 9 for much of Scotland, so it will feel cold in the wind. And there'll be further showers of a wintry nature coming into parts of Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Rain and hail at lower levels, snow above around 150 metres. So a frosty start to the weekend, but a bright start once again. And with lighter winds and a bit more sunshine around, Saturday looks like a more cheerful day compared to Thursday and Friday. In fact, showers will be mostly confined to Northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, North Wales. Otherwise, plenty of fine and bright weather. And Sunday starts once again with a widespread frost, but for the vast majority, it'll be a dry and bright day.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating